what would people see or experience if they were to walk into your class?
So I think pre-COVID, if you walked into my computer science classroom, I really value like the social interactions that are available between students and creating like a collaborative environment that's just like the default. So you would probably not see silence. Like you would hear things. You would hear students talking with each other. You would see students like kind of moving around if the classroom is capable of doing that. You would see at times it would be hard to tell where the teacher is. That's my favorite thing of like when an aide would come in with a pass, they'd have to like scan the room and it's always a game of like, are they going to figure out who's the teacher? And sometimes they don't. They just give it to another student. They're just like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm going to give this to someone else. So that's like a really great piece of the classroom. And so a lot of that comes from just like my experiences working in like academic summer camps. I think everyone should have the opportunity to like teach at an academic summer camp because the things that you value are so different than in a traditional classroom because no one has to be there. So everyone is just there by elective, which means that like you kind of have to motivate them coming back. Like you want them to have a positive experience, which means creating like engaging lessons is tantamount. Like if you have a whole afternoon where all you're doing is like lecturing, because that's like the most efficient way you thought about of presenting the material, that you're going to lose all those kids. Like no one has to be there. They're going to go home and complain and be like, we didn't have any fun today. And then the other piece of it is like summer camps really emphasize the relationship, both between you and the students with each other. So you really start to emphasize this idea of how do I get to know my students and leverage that into the classroom environment? And then also what situations can I create where students get to know each other and interact with each other in ways that like help build these social skills? And you're also not thinking about like standards or tests. Like you're only thinking about how do I know my students are learning what they need to do? And how do I make sure that they're like progressing in a way that feels valuable to them personally? And all those things are so different from like a traditional classroom. So all of that to say, like I carry a lot of that into what my class looks like. And so finding ways for students to interact with each other, finding ways to be like playful at times, finding ways for them to do projects that are like meaningful. All those kind of come from my experiences working at like academic summer camps.
So I have multiple questions related to that. So one, going back to what you're kind of saying, how it's difficult to apply research on university classes into like the K-12 setting. Like they're apples and oranges. There's a huge difference in terms of if somebody's electing to take a class versus if they're paying tens of thousands of dollars a year in tuition to attend a class versus when they're mandated to take a class. So I'm curious, how have you approached, like when you were a math educator, I'm assuming students were mandated to be in there because of the math requirements to graduate from high school. How did that approach differ from your elective classes where kids are choosing to be in your computer science classes?
Well, so some things are transferable in a way. So for example, in my experience as a math teacher, I will accept the premise of, they're there mandatorily because they have to be. And I will raise the stakes. So the types of classes I taught, these were students usually the year that they had to take the high stakes test in Arizona. So it was very important that they pass this. And they were already in another math class. So they were in one math class, and then they also had me separately. So they had two math classes that year. And I taught this extra math class, and I was taking away an elective spot. So if they really liked band, I got to yank them out of band, and they were now in my class teaching math. And math is not, they have like a very negative self-image about math. And so they don't like it anyway. And now we're saying you're in two math classes, one of which is taking away an elective spot. So not only were they like mandated to be there, there was like a lot of anti everything, like they are not interested in being in this class. And nevertheless, I got to work with these students, and they're all, regardless of their own personas, both projected on them externally and that they've internalized themselves, like they're all brilliant kids and they're all great. And so a strategy that works really well in that environment that I carry with me in other places is realizing that like traditional methods just don't work and you have to find a different way to go around it. So like if teaching math traditionally as the textbook prescribes or as I remember it, if that had worked, these students wouldn't be in this class, which means that by the nature of them being here, I need to find something that's like tangentially related, almost tricking them into like doing math. I kind of anecdotally called it like teaching sideways. So it's like they have like this brick wall that if you teach it the regular way, they'll just crash into the wall. But if you can find like this sideways path around the wall, then all of a sudden you've moved past it. And so that is transferable and applicable in especially like very abstract concepts in computer science. It's like tricking them into doing something that doesn't feel necessarily concretely related, but is now this activity or this task that we can reference that has all these tangential side effects of being related to this task that we're looking at. Like there's lots of ways to do like Boolean logic, like ands and ors and truth tables and things like that, without just doing a truth table, because truth tables are boring. But you can find lots of ways to do that still get the point across of how this type of logic works, whether that's with cards or dice or 20 questions or things like that. You can still get that point across and then have this tangential effect of like, surprise, you've been doing this the whole time.
Right.
So that is like something that's like transferable from that environment. And so like in those situations where students are kind of being forced to be in the class, another thing that's like super important is, well, it's important all the time. It's just like building relationships, like having a teacher who like believes in you and trusts in you and is willing to start fresh in so many different ways is super important for students in that context. And also in any other context, whether they've been mandated to be a part of the class or they've elected to be in the class, that part stays the same. My classes were always elective classes, like students could choose to take them, but also students needed full schedule. So sometimes students would just get placed into the classes, especially like my introductory classes. So in that sense, it still kind of feels like a mandatory class. Like they're there because they get the high school credit they need and they don't have as much sort of like motivation there. And so then I see it as like an opportunity to surprise. It's like computer science is unique and interesting, I think, in that at the high school level, or even the middle school level, you haven't formed an identity about it necessarily. So like by the time you get to high school, you think of yourself as like either a math person or you're not a math person. You're an English person, you're not an English person. You're this or you're that. You have like your own sense of identity based on your prior experiences. And computer science is a place where, because it's not offered so often all over the place, it's a chance at the high school level to like really reframe some of those identities. And students can create a whole new one of like, I can be successful at this. Even though I don't think of myself as a math person, I can do math in the context of computer science and not even realize that I'm doing it and have this positive association with myself being creative and solving puzzles in a way that is like empowering and can build self-esteem and just be really cool for students that we have in the room. So that's like the opportunity I see when it's a mandated class.
This excerpt of the CSKA podcast is from episode number 47, which is titled From Matthew McMatherson to Cody McCoderson, an interview with Dan Schneider. You can listen to this full episode, as well as hundreds more, by searching for the CSK8 podcast on your favorite podcast app, or by going to jaredoleary.com.